Hi, everybody. I'm Geno, and I am definitely codependent, and I'm grateful to be here. And thank you for the committee to asking me to speak. It's always an honor to speak at CODA. I usually give, whenever I've given a talk, there's usually 3 talks that I give. There's the one I do before I do it. There's a talk that I give, and then there's the critique afterwards that I do in my head, the talk afterwards after I'm done, and it's usually fairly abusive sometimes. I'm trying to get beyond that and actually be my own friend. Now, my topic today is about how to be your own BFF, or as the subtitle is, you're stuck with yourself anyway, so you might as well be friends. All right, because there's one person we're with the rest of our lives, and that's us. Okay, so I'm going to start with telling my story a little bit to kind of to show you why I belong here, and to kind of so you can understand where I'm coming from and how I got into this program, and why it's so important to me. Okay, I'll start at the beginning. I was born in Philadelphia many years ago, and let me put it this way: I'm the son of an alcoholic. I'm the grandson of an alcoholic. I'm the great grandson of an alcoholic. I'm the nephew of an alcoholic. I'm the father of an alcoholic. I'm a cousin of an alcoholic, and I am also an alcoholic. So loosely translated, that means I'm Irish. And so I came from that family. I also came from a military family, and all the men in my family, most of the men in my family, I'll say, at least the authority figures of the people I looked up to or everything, had PTSD because they were all combat veterans. And that played a part in my upbringing as well. There's certain things that go along with that. And as fate would have it, I have that as well. Being in a military family meant that we moved around a lot. And so I lived in Europe and different places like that. And I ended up in Ohio later. There's the usual thing that goes along with the alcoholic family, the chaos, you never knowing what was going to happen, waiting for the other shoe to drop, the fear, the riding in a car with somebody that's impaired, wondering whether you're going to survive the night as a child. I remember some of my earliest memories were bars. My grandfather taking me into the BFF or bars or things like that in West Philadelphia, and going to the NCO club with my old man and things like that as a child. So that sort of behavior was normalized for me, and those sort of stuff I just took for granted. That's the way it was. I guess I remember when I was another early memory was when I was around, I'm thinking about 4, and I used to look up the street, and I could see my grandfather walking up, coming home, and I could tell by his gait how he walked. He had a little bit of a gimp from a World War I. Something got hurt his legs or something in World War I. And but I remember he had this walk, and I could tell by his walk how much he had to drink and what kind of a mood he would be in, and whether it was going to be safe for me or not. And I remember looking at that and thinking, whether I had to take off or whether he was going to be fun or anything like that. So I was already at that age, I was hyper vigilant around my family members, and that, led on to the way I ended up being. I do remember I didn't remember, let me rephrase this. I was generally uncomfortable with myself all the time, with who I was and how I perceived myself was always fairly negative and mediocre at best. If I did things mediocre, I thought I was a success. I didn't really understand. That was probably like the best I could pull off then. And I remember that was part of my deal. But I do, and I'm not going to go into a big AA talk or anything like that. But I want to mention this part of it. Whenever I took a drink probably when I was around 9. And that was when I was in France because we were living in France at the time and there's no age limit for that. So I already figured that out. And I remember that euphoric sensation that I first experienced from that was a transcendent experience. I felt okay. It was like, how come everybody doesn't do this all the time? This is the best thing I've ever experienced. Beyond that, maybe that had to do with being an alcoholic waiting to happen or whatever, or the sleeping giant being awoken or whatever. But that tells me that I was generally uncomfortable with myself all the time. And then I achieved some semblance of self-worth, self-comfort from that particular experience. And that was to, of course, dominate my life for quite a while. moving right along, I came back from overseas, and then we went to then we were living in Ohio. We moved to Ohio, and I was living there. And the way I became this as I grew up there, in high school and all that stuff. I started getting in a lot of trouble. I became kind of a rebellious sort of fellow, and had a lot of problems with authority figures. And I do remember one time I was in high school, and I had to go to the vice principal's office once again, for some kind of problem I did or whatever, was something that I did or some breaking of the rules or something, which I would do most readily. And I remember the vice principal told me, he said, "Hannon," he says, "you're nothing but a belligerent young hoodlum." And I remember thinking, oh, all right, I like that. I'll take that. That's something. I was going, yeah, I like that. To me, that was better than who I really was. So I took on that role of this hooligan type person, and handled things physically a lot. That was my way of dealing with my inferiority and my low sense of self. And moving right along, I was, there was a lot of problems with police and cops and guns and all that stuff. And when I was living there, and so what does a kid do who has a lot of problems with authority figures? He joins the Marine Corps, right? Which is what I did where everybody's an authority figure. Okay, I don't know, and maybe it was me trying to be. I think it was some sort of a metric, I thought, for masculinity, which I didn't think I had or anything like that. So I went to do that, and that was in the 1960s. So as you know, there was an event over in Southeast Asia called the Vietnam War, which it was a recent unpleasantness in Southeast Asia, and I was, being a Marine, I was a participant in that, and that was another inflection point in my life that changed me forever. Was that I came back from that, and all my relationships during this time were, I looked at them and they were they never lasted very long. and they were always fraught with self-abandonment, me self-abandoning or demanding somebody to self-abandon or things like that. A lot of it had to do with my addiction at the time, which was progressing at that point to where I was getting difficult. I managed to get in a career going in, and after I got out of the Marines, I stumbled into an IT profession, which was brand new back then, and there was no classes for it or anything, so you could get in on the ground floor. And I became an IT professional, so to speak, or an IT manager, actually. And I did that. I was able to hold the job together, although the addiction was starting to bleed into the work, and was starting to give me problems. I guess it came to a head after I started getting in trouble with the law again, and I was trying to do this job. I had already failed at one marriage by this time. I had a marriage, I had 2 children, and the house with the 2 cars and the things you're supposed to do and everything like that. And that, and then that fell apart because, when you're in the middle of an addiction, it takes over everything, and it becomes the primary driving force in one's life psychologically. And I've heard it classified as a relationship with a substance, like it's another person. It becomes your best friend, and it was the only thing that could stop this feeling of unease that I had with myself personally. It was the driving force, and so I came into recovery after it's an issue. You guys know what White Castles are? I think there's one here. There's White Castles, and they were the elite meat to eat, right? They were back in those days. They were the only things open at 2:30 in the morning after the bars closed. So, but anyway, I used to get arrested at White Castles occasionally, and that's what they were. Usually a sight for me, where I had altercations with the local constabulary, and so finally there was one where I got arrested at one, and somehow I knew that this was what way it was going to be from now on, and I thought that I might want to do something. I had been thinking I had problems with an addiction and anything like that, but the idea of giving up the one thing that made me feel okay, that kind of pushed down this hideous relationship that I had with myself, it kind of covered it over, and was a frightening prospect at that time. But I thought I might as well try to do it because I was afraid I was going to lose my job and all that stuff. I'd already lost a marriage and everything like that by that time. So I came into recovery, and that was in 1982, right around Christmas time. Okay, so that started, and here I am doing that, and I'm unaware, and by this time I have PTSD as well from the Vietnam experience. Totally unaware of it. I just didn't know that I was reacting funny to different things. I had an exaggerated startle response, and loud noises, certain smells would give me anxiety and things like that. And I had no idea about that. I went into recovery and started dealing with the addiction stuff back then, and that worked okay. And I thought I was doing fine, although my relationships were still one thing after another, and I couldn't figure out any patterns in relationships. I remember seeing patterns in some of my behavior in conjunction with my addiction, but I couldn't see anything. I wasn't unable to see the dysfunction in my relationships because they seemed so familiar. They were familiar to kind of what I was used to seeing growing up and things like that, even though mine never lasted, but it kept on going like that. I remember I was very grateful to get out of the addiction thing, but the interesting thing about it is I never realized that. I always thought that the problem was just if you take the substance away, everything's going to be good because that's the problem. That's it. That's the problem. What I really did never realize, and it's in the book, it says that it was, I think it's paraphrased, liquor is but a symptom of deeper lying stuff. Well, this program is where the deeper lying stuff is and gets to. It's my alcoholism was just a symptom of that basic discomfort and relationship with myself. But I was totally unaware of that at that time. And what kind of moved me into this facet of my recovery, the CODA piece, was I was probably about 2-3 years into recovery at that time. And it was one of them boy meets girl on the AA campus, that kind of thing. And it was, I never realized, one thing I never thought I was back then was naive. But boy, was I naive about a lot of stuff. Anyway, I got into this relationship in recovery, and it was one of the worst experiences I've ever. It was really hideous. Okay, and the good news about it is it did start me on this. It chased me into this into the codependency part of my recovery. Now this is before there was CODA meetings or anything back then. But I read the book. I got that book, Codependent No More, and read that and was reading some of that other reading material and listening to tapes from some of those people who were bridging this subject in the recovery community. They were sort of talking about this kind of stuff, about your upbringing and how you view yourself and how your relationships are always always fraught with problems and self-doubt and all those things. And I was listening to those people. There's a few of them. One of them was a guy. He was in the AA community, and he did a lot of talks. He's gone now. He's dead now. So I guess I can use his last name. His name was Bob Earl. And I had a lot of his tapes, and he'd been around a long time, and he was kind of talking about this stuff back then. And it really resonated with me because he talked about feeling inadequate and feeling and understand, and talked about his family and how when he grew up and the different things that happened and all that, and how his self-esteem was just in the dumps. And his self-view, no matter how he tried to hide it, he couldn't. And I was doing the same thing. I was doing the same stuff. And so I never really got to, I never really got to CODA until I moved to Arizona, which was in 1988. I came out here in 88. This was while I was in the midst of that. I think that was a geographic cure for that, an attempt at a geographic cure for that totally dysfunctional marriage that I got into in recovery. It was really bad, and it was really uncomfortable. And I kind of reverted after I was before I got into recovery, I was always the one that was the demanding people to, take care of me, meet my needs, do this stuff, and abandon yourself, whatever it is. I'm in control. Da 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 da. And then it kind of switched roles after I got into my initial recovery, and then I was the one I was the one self-abandoning. I was the one trying to be the good guy for one time. I just wanted to be the good guy because I thought of myself as a bad guy, and I was just trying to be the good guy. And I kind of picked another person that would basically revisit my family origin and all the stuff that went on there. It was the same stuff. It was the same stuff, and it was awful. It was just awful. And the good news is it didn't last long. By the time we moved out here, within a year, it dissolved, and I escaped, so to speak. But I didn't escape from me. But I had also went to my first CODA meeting back then when I came out of, because this is the only place it was. This is where it started here in the Phoenix area. So I started, and there was a few meetings in, and I started going in, not a lot in earnest, but I was getting oriented with it, and I was reading the literature and all that stuff. The books weren't done by that time. As I recall, the blue book or the workbook or any of that stuff wasn't there. And I really didn't get introduced to that till I came back, so to speak, a few years later. Okay. And started going in earnest. I want to say that this part of my recovery was the part where I really started finding out a whole lot about myself, and it's a whole lot about how I started building. It was about building a relationship with myself. I'll tell you how I got started going again. It's pretty interesting. It gives you an idea of who I am or what kind of guy I was. Now, my wife, some of you folks know my wife, Carol. She's in the program as well. But she hadn't done that. She was doing Al-Anon at the time. Okay. And somebody in Al-Anon said to her, why don't you go to this CODA meeting up the street here? Da, 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 da. And I hadn't been in a while by that time. It'd been a while since I'd been, because I went for about 2 or 3 years, and then I kind of drifted away. And so she was going to this CODA meeting, and something was happening. There's 2 guys in there that didn't like each other. Okay. And some kind of political stuff was coming up, and they were talking that, and these guys were acting out. One guy was, she thought there was going to be like a fight, and she was kind of scared. She told me about it. And and the reason I came back was because of, oh, wow, I'm going to go see this. Maybe I'll get to see a fight, or that's where I was. Okay. I can't, maybe I'll get to see a fight or something like that, or whatever, but that's how I started back in. And that was probably, I don't know how long ago it was, somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago, something like that, where I really started back in earnest and started doing stuff and helping people. When was that? The Peanut Gallery back here said it was 17 years ago. So anyway, so I've been doing it a lot more in 17, even though I've been in CODA 34 years, I guess. 17 years, really. Now I got to go backtrack a little bit real quick here. Before that, I kept relapsing in the AA program. It wasn't like I'd go out for years or anything, but I would just end up, I was in all this pain, and I didn't know what to do about it, and then I would just resort back to the only solution that I knew that would happen. And finally, I have to say this, because this is part of my story, and this kind of I want you to, this thing is about me telling you who I am. That's what recovery is, me being me and letting you see me be me. And finally, I get like 17, 18 years, and then it would happen. And then I come back in and I'd be okay for a while. And then I go about 12, 8, anywhere between 10 and 20 years again. And then another relapse would happen. And I come back, And finally, I had a sponsor who could read me real well at that time. And he told me, he says, I think your problem is the Vietnam thing, and you better go deal with it. Or you're never going to survive. And there was some serendipitous or God shot, if you like, situations that occurred that I ended up going to the only place I could get some coverage for that would be with the VA. And then I went to the VA. And then another part of my healing started, another inflection point in my life to where the healing started. And then I was able to really grasp the Dakota message about myself, because had taken that stuff was standing between me and me, between Geno and Geno. And then that started healing. And then the recovery really started really good after that. And that was when I really started bringing a guy named Geno to the meeting, the real one, not the one I thought you wanted to see, but the real guy, the guy that who had all the flaws and all the warts, the guy who was afraid, the guy who didn't have recovery down pat, even though he'd been around a long time. I wasn't Captain Recovery, and I was just another bozo on the bus. Okay, and I just got to be me and be okay with me. And by God, I started getting comfortable with me. I started liking me and things like that. And there were people around me that taught me to accept myself and accept the way you accepted me. And that was really good. And I think there's a healing thing that happens in the meetings, a healing energy that even on the Zoom, I get it from the Zoom ones and in the in-person ones, but there is like a healing salve that goes on my soul in these meetings that helps me deal with me. And anyway, and I'm grateful. And now as far as relationships go, I'll tell you what I learned. I looked back at my relationships after I started seeing the patterns and really started looking good. And I noticed that I was, well, let me say this first. My mother, God love her, was an oldest child in an alcoholic family, right? So she was very taken care of. She had a lot of siblings, and she was taking care of. So there was a lot of control that she was dealing with and doing that. And she was very controlling with me too when I was a child. And so I translated controlling behavior as to love. I thought, I knew my mother loved me. So I thought part of love was control. When somebody tried to control me, even though I didn't like it, I made that assumption. And I noticed that there was a lot of controlling. I was kind of attracted to controlling women because what I thought about situation didn't matter because I didn't count. Okay, I figured if somebody liked me, I better take them because somebody that likes me because I didn't like me, they're going to be few and far between, and I better settle and take what I can get. Okay. And then I started seeing how I did that. And then with the help of this program, I started thinking, well, maybe I deserve better. Maybe I'm not this really bad guy, and maybe I deserve to be happy, and maybe I deserve to be satisfied in my life, and maybe I can do something about that. And maybe I ought to, and these things that are getting between me and me, they're compulsions. And maybe I better look to my higher power to deal with my compulsions and use the steps to be entirely ready to have them removed. Entirely ready, this attitude about myself to be removed. And not all at once, but incrementally. It's they've been leaving me, and I've been doing okay. Now I'm actually in a marriage now. We've been together 25 years. That is a goddamn miracle for me. I've never got beyond 5 or 6 years with anybody. That was like my record before that. And we're not, I think I'm happily married. I feel pretty good. I don't feel like I have to self-abandon. I don't have to do everything to make sure everybody's, I still have some things where I get worried about somebody's not feeling good. I think it's my responsibility or it's my fault, or that kind of stuff. Or somebody and I have to go through the mental exercise and like say, no, calm down. This doesn't have anything to do. Everything's not about you. And all that stuff. And I can let it go, and then I can get back into my comfort zone. And I like that. So I think that's about enough of my story. And I'm going to get ready to talk about being your friend. Do we want to break here, or before I do that? We've gotten this far. You kind of know where I'm coming from. And, I've got all this recovery and very little growth. So it took a while for me to get there. But anyway, I hope I haven't offended anybody as of yet. If I haven't offended you as of yet, please be patient. I'll get to you as soon as I can. Okay? We'll get to you as soon as you can. My wife says I'm rough around the edges, so that may happen. Okay? Now, you may hear a lot of we's and you's and stuff in my talk going on. Really what I meant is what I did with me. I'm not trying to crosstalk or do any of that stuff with you, but just be aware of that. So I got here in Dakota, and I thought, what's all this stuff about love of self? A friend and I were talking the other night about it, and we both agreed that our first impressions upon hearing this phrase was, it was kind of creepy, because I correlated it to being conceited and arrogant. It just didn't feel right to say self-love or I love myself or anything like that. It only started making sense after I realized that I was operating out of the opposite mindset. I was operating out of self-loathing. And I look back at how my life was, and if anyone ever treated me, spoke to me, or put me in situations that I did to myself, I would probably have to shoot them. I mean, they would not be somebody I would like. They wouldn't be my pal, that's for sure. And one of my biggest fears was that you would see me the same way as I see myself. So if somebody gave me a compliment or some praise, or always that little insistent little voice in my head would say, yeah, if you really knew me like I knew, you would never say that. That was always going on. And what I found out is we, all people, are given a personal narrative of who we are, what our story is, and what we deserve and what we can expect. And we tend to interpret the events and situations we experience to fit that story. So if you come from a dysfunctional background like me, you're going to attract and be attracted to people and events that can facilitate those interpretations that'll tend to mirror the pain and suffering experienced and deserved, because it feels like home. It feels like home. And that's what's referred to in psychological circles as a confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is a deeply embedded human trait and often a great weakness, certainly in my case. Once I know something, I tend to see only the evidence that supports it. Anything else I ignore. And I think codependency is that bias expressing itself throughout our lives, and especially in our relationships. I was a cognitive prisoner, trapped within the conceptual scheme of the paradigm I grew up in. Now, our brains are often referred to as computers. So when I was a little guy in that house in Philadelphia, I watched and absorbed everything that went on. And it was all like programs going into computer memory, being downloaded into my head to be used later or referred to later. The programs I downloaded when I was little formed my default setting. In the first 7 years, my brain downloaded every single thing that happened in my presence. Everything that was said, done, felt by me or others went straight into my subconscious. Before I was 7, I didn't have a conscious brain function that said, whoa, no, I'm not downloading that as a way to deal with anger, hurt. That's crazy. That didn't happen. If that's what happened if that's what happened in my presence, it was just downloaded into my subconscious and formed the default setting from which I would venture forth into the world. That's why I did the stuff that isn't very skilled when it comes to relationships. In computer terms, some of the files I downloaded from what went on around me, from the way the people I loved treated other people that I loved, were corrupt files. But I'm big now, and I can do a cleanup of those files that are out of date. And that's what I've been doing. I wasn't living my life. My life was living me. So when you're a trauma survivor, a conversation isn't just a conversation. It's analyzing the other person's every word, movement, and shift of energy, looking for the slightest hint of danger, rejection, or abandonment. It's really exhausting. And it makes it really hard to truly connect with anyone. The hard work of recovery demands that I take an honest look at some of the hard to swallow truths about codependency. There's 6 of them. There's more than 6, but there's 6 that I got here. Okay. The first one is we manipulate connection. Codependents can be some of the most generous, giving people out there, but the reason for this is often less noble. Although we mean well, we subconsciously turn to manipulation to prove our self-worth and to soothe our intense fear of abandonment. Ultimately, our generosity is motivated by insecurity and fear rather than kindness. Below the surface, we're desperately trying to stay ahead of the feelings of low self-worth that threaten our ability to connect. We put the wants and needs of others ahead of our own, and we don't practice boundaries out of fear of upsetting our partners. I was unconsciously manipulating my way into what I thought was a secure relationship. We don't act out of malice, but out of fear that we would never have the love we desire so badly if our true unlovable selves were exposed. Codependents are love bombers. In the beginning, we'll go overboard in a blaze of fireworks and shooting stars that light up the dark sky. It's a dazzling show of flowers, romance, poems, gifts, dinners, affection, favors, and compliments that fills the air like confetti and lands at the feet of our starstruck lovers. How do you like that, huh? We've set the bar unsustainably high and we'll be chasing those initial days the rest of our relationship. It's a slow slide back to reality, and we're terrified that our flawed, authentic selves aren't worthy of the love we have. I think we have. Number 3, codependents struggle with love addiction. Love bombing might be manipulative and unsustainable, but it feels pretty great at the time. Pure dopamine-driven euphoria kept me lost in the clouds of a blissful high. We're starved for love and affection and feel powerless against the potent mix of attention and passion and sex that comes with the new relationships. I was addicted to love, and I'd be quickly overwhelmed by the excitement of my fast-moving, intense relationships. In all my euphoria, I didn't see the red flags. I took huge emotional risk without a care in the world. Codependents abandon themselves. Ironically, while we struggle with fear of abandonment, we're quick to abandon ourselves to stay connected to our relationship. Because we have no real sense of self or self-esteem, the connection to our relationship is much more important than a connection to myself or ourselves. Our individual needs are sacrificed as we merge into our relationships until we can't tell where our relationship ends and we begin. Eventually, the self-abandonment takes a toll, silently filling our empty spaces with resentment and shame. We self-sabotage. If we aren't comfortable with prosperity, joy makes us anxious. We're always waiting for the shoe to drop because we don't feel deserving of the feelings we have. Our insecurities leave us hypervigilant, and we're always searching for signs of trouble, confirming our deepest fears that we are unlovable. We react to all this anxiety by pushing our relationships into uncomfortable narratives filled with insecurity and rejection. Worse, without the skills to navigate the conflicts we create, we'll again feel isolated and alone, wrapped inside the familiar childhood feelings we carried into adulthood. Okay, our lives grow smaller over time. This is the 6th one, the last one. We trade pieces of ourselves for love and connection, and our world begins to shrink. Over time, the line between our individuality and the relationship becomes unrecognizable. We rarely venture beyond the walls of the relationship, and the parts of ourselves we enjoyed living before, beyond those walls, are lost. And before I continue, it is now 3 minutes after 2, and I think we want to take a break. Somebody's probably dancing in their chair, wanting to take a break. So we'll stop there, and then I'll finish up after that. Okay? The 6 qualities I just listed. Okay. Yeah. The first one is these are the kind of like symptoms of codependence in relationships. They're not exactly qualities. They're hindrances, I would say. The first one is number 1 is we manipulate connection. Okay. And that was, we put the wants and needs of others ahead of our own. But we manipulate the connection itself. But we give gifts, the thing where you give gifts and heap praise on people we want to manipulate. That's one of them. The next one, we're love bombers. In the beginning, we go nuts, overboard with a blaze of fireworks in the dark sky. And, and all that stuff too. I think that's sort of like a manipulation myself too, with a lot of gifts and romance and poems and things like that. And then the third one is we struggle with love addiction, which is basically an addiction to the object of our love. And we ignore red flags, and we'll take a lot of emotional risks without any care in the world. And number 4 is we abandon ourselves. Who we are, may put it in simple terms, is we become secondary, and the relationship trumps us, so to speak. as human beings. Okay, so we'll abandon ourselves to try and manage the feelings of the other person. We don't want them to get mad. Okay, and of course that one ends up with resentments, which is always fun to have. The fifth one is we self-sabotage. And that's pretty self-explanatory. We're insecure, and if we have any kind of success with anything, we get uncomfortable with it because we don't think we deserve it. And the last one, number 6, is our lives grow smaller over time as we shrink our life into the confines of this relationship, and we have no thing outside of that, and it becomes kind of like a substance. It's another addiction, in my view. We become addicted to the relationship of the person, just like I did with substances as well. I'll repeat them again, just to make sure. Manipulate connection, love bombing, struggle with love addiction. 4, we abandon ourselves. 5, we self-sabotage. And 6, our lives grow smaller over time. Okay, now we listed all this awful stuff that we do to ourselves and how we look at ourselves. And so how do we get out of that? Okay, how do we become our own friends? So without encouragement to grow as individuals, we unconsciously grieve the loss of ourselves as we navigate the tight spaces between people-pleasing and conflict avoidance. Our voices are silenced, we're unwilling and unable to advocate for ourselves and our needs. The love we once thought would set us free now wraps us just like a straitjacket. I'll be the first to admit these traits are tough to swallow. It took a lot of courage to look at the parts of myself that I was most ashamed of. But to make the most out of recovery, we have to tackle our most challenging issues. We got to look at it. We got to be aware. I'm going to add something. And we have to give up the desire to be right, give up the desire to win, and replace it with the desire to discover the truth. We must acknowledge and accept that these behaviors keep us from the lives we want. While resources like therapy can be an important part of our recovery, the real work comes when we begin to actively change our patterns of behavior. One of the biggest messages of my recovery is that I'm accountable to myself for my happiness, and that hinges on my relationship with me. We learn to accept imperfection in ourselves and others. Begin to navigate healthy connections without manipulation. We learn to nurture our individual identities within interdependent relationships. We trade love bombing and love addiction for building strong, healthy relationships. We work to strengthen our self-trust and self-esteem and meet our own needs rather than trying and relying on others to meet our needs, which we don't tell them about anyway, which we secretly keep and think they should know, right? We have suffered alone in our pain, but we aren't alone at all. Our experiences we share can be a source of great strength. We're in this together. And if we can find the courage to work hard and support each other, we just might find a way to the better lives and relationships we deserve. Recovery is about the art of the possible. And it's definitely possible for me and you, I think, to redesign our relationships with ourselves. So I put together a list of some truths some of the truths that I've become aware of that no longer bind me to my negative self-view. I classify these as representatives of my newfound relationship with myself, and I think most of them are about honoring my authenticity. You be the judge. Now, here's a caveat. Very few of these thoughts are original. They're not, I don't just think them up, okay? I hear them all over the place, different things, not even related to recovery and stuff. But I've taken ideas and things I've heard of different stuff and translated them into recovery parlance and philosophy. I think the basic truths in all of them remain the same. They're basic truths for our humanity. Okay, so who's your BFF? Okay, there's one person that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. You. So why not be friends? You'll never speak to anyone more than you speak to yourself in your head. Think about that. You never speak to anyone more than you speak to yourself in your head. So be kind. Why not speak with a kind voice? Recovery isn't about fixing yourself. You don't need fixing. It's about discovering, then loving yourself as you are and evolving because you can. There's a difference. It's not about changing who you are. It's about getting rid of who you're not. Not everyone is meant to be in our lives to the end. So when someone brings pain and suffering and disrespect into your life, let them go. If you choose, you may wish them well from afar. If it's not possible to let them go completely, I'll make sure that I limit my energy and time spent in their presence. Remember, you are worthy of respect. So am I. You matter. Your life matters. It's not who you have, not what you have in your life, but who you have in your life that counts. Never allow anyone to tell you that you're overreacting, or that your feelings are overblown, or that you're too sensitive. Feelings are feelings. They're meant to be felt, acknowledged, understood, and then they begin to move through the body, releasing you of the pain and suffering, period. Never deny your feelings or push them down, thinking that they will simply disappear eventually. If your feelings are not acknowledged and felt, they will come out sideways somewhere in your life as anger, resentment, fear, or even illness. People have said, don't cry to other people for years and years. You guys have heard that one, I'm sure. And all that has ever meant is I'm too uncomfortable when you show your feelings. That's what that means. So if you're hurt, you're hurt. So feel the feelings. Understand how they're impacting you. Take the actions that are in your best interest and do no harm to others. No one notices your sadness until it turns into anger. And then you're the bad guy. You're going to hit a point where you're no longer interested in convincing people that how you feel and who you are is valid, and decide that as long as you know your truth and what works for you, that's all that matters. We don't have to explain our values. We just embody them. If you don't see your own worth, this is important. If you don't see your own worth, you'll always choose people who don't see it either. The most important lesson I've learned over this journey is don't let anyone make you cruel. No matter how badly you want to give them give the world a taste of its own bitter medicine, it's never worth losing you myself. Real self-esteem is an integration of inner value with the things in the world around you. Live your values. Don't compromise. When we see ourselves based upon what other people say we are, we know ourselves chiefly by hearsay. What you think, see yourself in the true light of who you are. No one can make me feel inferior without my participation. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls my life. Forgive yourself for not knowing better. You're wiser now, and you've learned so much to make better choices. It's a new day. End the guilt trip and regret. Move upward and forward into your desired state. Your mental shift will create a whole new world for you. Self-forgiveness, very important. Take your life back. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Do so, love, honor, and accept yourself completely, and be kind to yourself. Be your friend. To deny your feelings is to deny the very thing that makes you human. That's what makes us human, is our feelings. Watch your thoughts. They become your beliefs. Watch your beliefs. They become your words. Watch your words. They become your actions. Watch your actions. They become your habits. Watch your habits. They become your character. And watch your character. It'll become your destiny. Little gems of wisdom there. Our thoughts only become beliefs if we fuse with them. Consciously learn to defuse our thoughts. I had to do that. We can create a layer of separation between the real you and your thoughts. The real you is the awareness prior to the thoughts, the space in which the thought happens. In a paradigm where we recognize that we are not the thinking self, thoughts don't have the same influencing pattern. Rather than seeing thoughts as a representation of reality, we can see them as just words passing through our heads. They come and go like cars passing by one's house, and they pop up in relation to internal and external stimuli that create a connection to past traumatic experiences in different ways. So being aware of it can free you from it. We are meant to learn, grow, and become the greatest version of who we are. Stand in your power, truth, integrity, and love confidently while understanding that you cannot change others. You can only wish them well and keep walking your path. It's not selfish to be who you are and want a life of satisfaction, success, and happiness. Be authentic, be the authentic you, and do no harm to others. This is your one precious life. Never settle, never abandon who you are and what you want because of another person's opinions. The person who matters most in your life is the one looking back at you in the mirror. Please don't settle. Not in a job you hate, not in a town where you don't feel home, not with friendships that aren't real, and especially not with love. Remember, all the program offers is a path to the truth, nothing more. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Okay, what am I doing? I'm going to close up here so we'll have some time for talking here. All right, I'm going to close it up. Here's what I want to. People generally change themselves for one or two reasons: inspiration or desperation. My recovery started within the pain of desperation. It began to flourish when it became driven by inspiration. So where did that inspiration come from? The most inspirational people I have known are those who have known defeat, loss, struggled, and found their way out of the depths. These folks have an appreciation, sensitivity, and understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep concern for others. Good people are not those who lack flaws. The brave are not those who feel no fear, and the generous are not those who never feel selfish. Extraordinary people are not extraordinary because they are invulnerable to character defects. They are extraordinary because they choose to do something about them. Special souls don't just happen. I've never met a strong person with an easy past. Never. I've learned a lot in my almost 4-decade journey towards healing. I found out that healing is not an event, nor is it a linear journey where I keep getting better. It's a process where there were detours along the way. There was debilitating and crushing grief and the mistake of trying to numb it with alcohol and drugs. Emotional pain is not something that should be hidden away and never spoken about. There's truth in the pain, there's growth in the pain, but only if it's brought out into the open. What I found that once I became conscious and shared my inner world and wounds, I embarked on a journey that kept on going to healing new and deeper levels of the damage I didn't even know as a young man back in the 1980s. I didn't even know about. I stopped being disassociated with my inner voice that had always been there, very deep under a mountain of trauma, and became a conscious human being. It was truly liberating and continues to deepen to this day. I believe everyone can find their way for that experience as well if they trust the process. Let's see. All right. One day I realized that happiness was never about my job, my education, or being in a relationship. Happiness was never about following in the footsteps of all those who came before me. It was never about being like the others. One day I saw that happiness was always about the discovery, the hope, the listening to my heart, and following it wherever it chose to go. Happiness has always been about being kinder to myself. It was always about embracing the person I was becoming. One day, hopefully, we'll all understand, or you'll understand, that happiness was always about how to learn to live with yourself. That happiness was never in the hands of other people. It was always about you. It was always about us. God bless you. That's all. Yeah, it was a long journey. It doesn't happen all at once. It's incremental. It has been for me. It's been an incremental thing. First, I had to find out what was standing between me and me. Okay, and that's in the steps. Okay, the green book. Okay, I had to go look at that stuff and start looking at what was, finding out, how to get my history straight. I had to understand it and everything like that, and not in a judgmental way. Okay, it's in more of an observer, an objective observer. Okay, and in an understanding, compassionate way. Once I looked at all these things that were happening within me, I realized somebody once said this to me, like, how else could you be? How else could I be? I mean, this was all predictable. It wasn't like I chose this stuff. It chose me. We don't choose this shit. It chooses us, bro. And we can also, we can choose to get out of it if we understand that we deserve better. You have to believe that you deserve better, and I think you do. The fact that you're here, the fact that folks are here and they're open to looking at what's going on, and that means you're not stuck. The people that are stuck don't even want to look at this stuff. They won't until they like me, get desperate enough to start looking at stuff and then get inspired to look at it more. And then the healing begins, you know, and believing that you deserve it. Sometimes it's, you know how sometimes we talk about affirmations and stuff? Have you heard that talked about? Read affirmations. Those kind of things help. You know, they've helped me at any rate. And that I am, yes, because everything I thought about myself was so negative, you know. And now I learned that it's not real. It's not true, you know. And it's not true about you either. We'll manipulate, codependents manipulate connections via under the guise of generosity. And you know, we're pretty generous folks, and we're giving people out there, but there's always a motive behind it. We're not just giving to giving. It's a transaction. You know, the manipulative connection is there's a reason that we do this, a lot of this giving, that I did a lot of giving and things like that. It wasn't just unconditional. Okay. There was like, okay, I'm doing this, and that means you're going to start liking me now because I'm not likable. So I'll just, you know, I would make myself a financial object sometimes with people. That was one of my strategies, so to speak. I'm not worthy enough, but hey, here, I've got this money and maybe you'll like me then. Okay. And my generosity was motivated by insecurity and fear rather than kindness. Below the surface, I was desperately trying to stay ahead of the feelings of low self-worth that threatened my ability to connect. Okay. So I put the wants and needs of others ahead of my own. And I don't practice boundaries out of fear of upsetting the other person. And I'm unconsciously manipulating my way into what I thought was a secure relationship. Okay, that was what the giving, it was transactional. Everything had a condition. I wasn't even aware of it, but there was always something. Okay, if I do this, you're gonna like me, or I'm gonna solidify the relationship. You know, it was out of that. That was trying to manipulate the connection. I know kind of cursory information. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know that how people react to what we say is how it's about them. You know, it's how they interpret it. Remember, I believe we all have at least I do. Remember I talked about the downloading of the stuff in my talk where we download. Okay, well, that creates a guy that I call an interpreter. Okay, all that programming, whatever it is from what we grew up with, mine was growing up in an alcoholic family, the stuff that happened in Vietnam, blah, 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 all that stuff. So that created an interpreter between me and the outer world. And that guy would interpret all those different events are in that interpreter, and he would interpret things and like somebody would do something, and then he kind of turns around to me and says, you know what this means, don't you? This means da da da, and he's referring something back, you know, in the past. It really isn't, you know, and that might have been something that was going on with her. Maybe she was attacked a lot or accused of a lot of stuff and things like that. I don't know for sure. Well, I'll do the best I can with it. You were kind of breaking up there a little bit on the connection, but I think it has to do with dealing with the family. Well, there's the thing we're codependent. People are codependent in pretty much every facet of their life. But I think the deepest hooks, and I call that the DNA factor. There's a DNA factor. And if I share chromosomes with you, I have a hell of a lot more harder time not acting codependent with you than if it was just some person in the meeting, another guy in the meeting or anything like that. The DNA factor is a big factor, and it is harder. because you've been doing it longer with them. And in my view, at least in my case, it was there was a guy who used to, one of the first guys that talked about this stuff, family origin stuff, was a guy named John Bradshaw a long time ago. Anyway, he talked, and it's true. He talked about the dysfunctional family, and he had a metaphor of, you know, them the mobiles. Remember them things you hang them over infants, and they're different brightly colored things like that, and they hang over little things and they look up at it, and there's little things on each one. And anyway, it's all balanced by each of the little pieces that are hanging on that mobile. And the dysfunctional family, everybody's one of them pieces, right? So one of us gets in recovery, okay? What happens? So you take that off the mobile, right? You take one piece. What happens to the mobile? It gets all askew and it hangs all messed up, right? And the rest of the people that are on that mobile raise hell with the one that's off to try and get it back on the mobile to balance everything out the way it's supposed to be. You know, the way everybody's, not because they like it, because it's familial, as in familiar. And so they're in as the rub, so to speak. And what I had to do, what I've done is I've redefined the definition of family. Okay. And what I do is I pull the biological piece out of it. Okay. I don't have to be chromosomally connected. Family is about support. It's about compassion. It's about caring. It's about safety and everything like that. And so family is, if I can get that with family members, and I do with some of them, I do, and that's cool, and I can be with them. But I don't think I've ever gotten as close to any of my family members that I have as with people in the program, people in recovery, because it's a little. I just connect better with the people because of the vulnerability principles and all that stuff. It was safer. But I understand that dilemma. And I think in my case it was family, you don't get to pick them. You know, there's an Irish expression, I'm Irish, as you know. There's an Irish expression that says, you can thank, I put on my best Irish accent. You can thank the Lord you get to pick your friends because it's the devil who picks your relatives. Okay. And that's been true in my case at any rate. But you just have to redefine. I just had to redefine how I would interact with them and what was safe for me and respectful of them, like it says in the promises. So good luck. I know it's a tough part. We tend to get tied into them old roles, and getting out of them is difficult. Quit judging yourself. That's one. Get off your case. You're perfect. You're all right where you're at. You're right where you're supposed to be. Okay. I think you're doing okay. I mean, I know you outside of this, and you're open to learning, and we all progress at our own rate, and all the rates are okay. However we do it, it's always okay. It's not. Somebody said one of the symptoms of self-confidence is that we don't compare. We no longer need to compare ourselves with others. Okay. And so when we compare, it's because we're giving somebody, making somebody better than us or whatever. Wherever we're at was okay. I mean, all the stuff I've had, it took me a while to say, it's okay. This is your journey. This is where you're at. And this is how it takes. Everybody has their own baggage when they come in here. And we all come in with a bunch of different baggages and everything like that. And some of the stuff is different to deal with. Okay. And there's nobody's ahead of the other. We're all in it. We're all in the same damn boat. Okay. And we're all just bailing the water out best we can. And we're all okay. So tell yourself you're okay because you are. Okay. Be gentle. Yes, it did. I think, let me say this. I admire people. I came into recovery. I got chased into recovery. Okay. Because I'm an addict and an alcoholic. But I've always admired people that just came into CODA and just, said, oh man, I need some help. I better do something about this. I'd have never been able to do this if I hadn't have had alcoholism and all that, because the symptoms of alcoholism a lot of them are illegal, and it took cops and guns to get my attention. Okay. Because if I was just codependent, I probably would still be out there doing that stuff, because they never arrest anybody for driving while obsessing, right? There's nothing against the law about that. I think the codependency has helped me with the PTSD. It's helped me better understand my alcoholism. It's helped me better understand all the other things that I have, because it makes me self-assess and introduce me to myself. It's that discovery that does it. I think working the CODA program helped me with all that stuff. I mean, I've read a lot of other stuff, different books and things like that aren't all CODA related stuff, literature or something. I get other stuff, but it's related in thought, but not, officially. And I do. I'm in a book group that we read different books in recovery and stuff and talk about it as we read them together. It's kind of fun. And so I guess I'm saying that I still go to AA meetings because I'm afraid to drink. I still have to be reminded. I go to CODA meetings because I still need to be reminded about my codependency, and so I can look at it and I can learn from other people. And I went to the VA every day, 3 days a week for months. Okay, dealing with this stuff, dealing with the baggage I was carrying from the war, and I just focused on, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, right? And deal with what's presented in front of me. And I take it the time. I can't do everything at once, but I do a little bit here and I do a little bit there. I go to different meetings and different things at different days of the week. And my recovery is pretty upfront in my life. Okay, it's I don't work my recovery around my life. I work my life around my recovery. And that's been the only way I can do it. Now maybe other people don't need to do that. I don't know. I could just tell you what I do. I don't know what would be right for you. I think I would be out of line saying, here's what you need to do, because I really don't know. I just know what's working for me. And I've had to do a few different things at the same time, but I don't overwhelm myself. As a codependent, I'm easily overwhelmed anyway. I can be overwhelmed by otherwise innocuous events, So, but I think you can learn a lot. If you can learn about yourself in CODA, you can learn about the other stuff and maybe decide, okay, I'll do some therapy about this. I'll do, something else, Anyway, I know your life is probably really full with a lot of stuff, but I'm not going to pontificate on what you ought to do, Well, it depends on what the past relationship was like. I don't want to, I don't know, every situation is different and every person is different. But if that person, oh boy, if that person was like, if it was a toxic relationship and it was a, if it was a dumpster fire, is that what's your motive? What's going on with you? What do you don't have to answer. You just ask yourself. You don't have to tell me, is what I'm saying. You could, or anybody else, you could just ask yourself what your motives are and what do you think you want to do? And are you going to be able to extricate yourself if it goes south? If it turns into something not conducive to being happy, joyous, and free. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But you have to ask yourself, what is your expectations going into this? Are you expecting something? Are you just going to just be friends to see what happens? Or are you expecting us to resume the old stuff before? And if it wasn't functional, if it wasn't that good, do you want to go back there? Or is it different? But you can always extricate yourself, I would imagine, if it's not good. That's the way I look at it. I'm free to make my choices, and if something is harmful to me, I don't do it anymore. I move on. Wish them well and move on. Yes, I don't. Well, I'd have to see what that person's motive is. If the person says, if I use this particular quote, I'm going to make him do that, then it might be, but it might be just, that's the answer that he has. You can't, one thing about manipulation is it's usually transactional. It's always transactional. Somebody does something and there's an expectation of getting something back. That's that's the definition of manipulation. Whatever that is. But if we think we're being manipulated, then we're not being manipulated because we're participating in the manipulation by doing it. We don't. So if you feel that you are, then you have to say, there's usually some sort of an expectation. It's always transaction. Manipulation revolves in transaction. I do this, I get this back. That's what that is. So I can't really say if it's manipulation or not. It might be just the best answer that guy's got at the time.